All right. Hello, everyone. Sorry I'm a few minutes late. I had a heck of a time finding a place to sit down and do today's lecture. Um, so, can you all see and hear me without any issue? Excellent. Okay, so before we get started, just so that there aren't any questions about this when I'm, getting into the lecture material, are there any questions about the proposal? Last chance, other than, email and Discord and so forth. Are there any questions about that before we get to today's stuff? Okay, Yusuf, go ahead. While you're typing, Yusuf, I'll just share my screen and get the slides ready. Okay. So Yusuf says, does it have to be at least 300 or can it be a little less? Well, not much less. 300 is kind of where you want to aim for, excluding excluding, yeah, that's right, excluding your title, the student information, and the references section. So basically, the body of your proposal, the area of interest, thesis statement or research question, and the plan of attack section together should be around 300 words. I would say no less than 275-ish. Um, it's less of a big deal if you go over, but don't go too far over. Like, don't hand me something that's like 1,000 words, right? And yeah, I think 3 drafts is good. That's right. Natalie asks, do our references need to be peer reviewed? Um, they should be, but yeah, you could use historical documents. Like, for example, if you were going to use some of the correspondence between um, Descartes and Princess Elizabeth, that would be acceptable. I would consider that a scholarly source. Yes, Jessica, that's so you're looking for the um, citation guide that I've made of it. Well, actually, it's multiple citation guides. So, in the helpful materials module, go to Purdue University's online writing lab, and it has all of the citation guides, and it will have what you need to make your citations. Now, keep in mind, you shouldn't really be relying on my lectures. First, I would cite the lecture itself, not the slides, but you also shouldn't really rely on my lectures for this. It's better to go for primary sources. So, I mean, if you cite my lecture, it's not the end of the world, but it's not really what you should be aiming for. Jesse, yes. Um, Depending on the citation style, you're going to use parenthetical references or footnotes, most likely. So, yeah, you want to be doing that. Mm. Wow, there are a lot of questions. Okay. Zane is asking how to upload all of the drafts. Um, yeah, you don't need to put them into one document or into one folder. Let's say you've got a folder with your notes, 2 early drafts, and a final. Just select all of those. Make sure they're all clearly labeled so I know what they are, right? But select all of those with your mouse, drop them into the Dropbox. You don't need to put them all into one file or into a single folder. The Dropbox will accept multiple file submissions. So just, click them all, drag them over there, put them in the Dropbox. Yes, Anas, that is fine. Think of your notes as like draft zero, right? Yeah, I think any citation style is okay, although I do recommend APA. Some of you might be more familiar with another style, depending on your major, right? English majors, maybe you're using MLA. History majors, Chicago. It's fine. I don't care. Um, but APA is nice. Nice and straightforward. Yes. Yes, that's right. Yeah, if you can't submit in Word format, submit in PDF. Those are the only two file types I can really open. If you have scans of handwritten notes, I can open those, like JPEGs, PNGs, but I cannot open other sorts of document files besides Word and PDF. Okay. Okay, so if there are any other questions, I would direct them to my email. Uh, yeah, yeah, they do. They count, but they're not going to be very much. It's going to be like Crumley 2016, right? It's like 2 words. So don't worry about it. Okay. So if you have any other questions, please direct them to the email or the Discord server, preferably email. And remember, before you ask me, double check all of the instructions. So that's the slides, the instructions in the template, my lecture, and whatever's in the course outline. So, okay, so we were talking about physicalism. I think where we left off is we were talking about two different kinds of physicalism. Remember that we were discussing type identity theory, which identifies mental states, types of mental states with types of brain states. So, if I am in pain, I have a certain type of mental state that is realized by a certain type of brain state. And when you're in pain, your pain is realized by the same type of brain state. But the problem with this is it seems to rule out non-humans having mental states. So this would include non-human animals. Additionally, it might include certain sorts of machines like computers or robots, right? So that's a problem. And then the alternative is sort of token type identity theory, the most, I think, common variation being functionalism. So on functionalism, how we understand what a mental state is in terms of its functional role within the system. So pain is not identified with a type of brain state, but rather pain plays this functional role. It's a sort of mental state that occurs between certain inputs and outputs, like, say, tissue damage, that's the input. Then you have pain, which in humans is realized by C fiber activation, and then some kind of output, like withdrawing from the painful stimulus and saying, ouch. One of the problems with functionalism, though, is that it doesn't really deal with qualia or with phenomenal consciousness. And that's really what we're interested in, I think. The one thing I really want to understand about pain is why it hurts. Why does pain feel the way it does and not like something else? Why does itch feel the way it does and not like pain? Right? Functionalism can tell us all about the roles that these states play in the whole system, but it can't tell us about the qualitative aspects of those states. Another problem with functionalism is that, well, it's the problem raised by Searle's Chinese room. Um, Functional systems um, might not really be thinking um, as the person in the Chinese room, right? Like they don't understand the meaning of the symbols that they're manipulating. This is what um, this is basically meant to be an analogy with a computer program. So computers operate only on the semantics, or sorry, only on the syntax, not the semantics. That's what makes things like logic or computer code formal languages or formal systems, because we attribute the meaning to the symbols. We decide what they mean. The computer is blind to the semantics. So the computer doesn't really understand anything. And if that's true, can they really be said to think? So, you know, if this argument is right, it's a problem for functionalism. It's a problem for the Turing test as well, a test of machine intelligence, which disappointingly Crumley doesn't really talk about. But if you have questions about it, or if you're thinking of writing your essay about this, go ahead, send me your questions. Okay, so yeah, that about does it for recap. Um, but there's other kinds of physicalism as well. For example, eliminative materialism. Now, eliminative materialism is really interesting because it denies that our folk notions of mental states are notions of things which actually exist. Our talk um, of mental states, talk of beliefs and desires, um, those things don't refer to anything real. Not only are mental states not really real, they actually hinder us when it comes to scientifically explaining the mind. Now, what do we mean by the mental isn't real on eliminative materialism? Well, think of the way that we ordinarily talk about our mentality. Um, this is something that we call folk psychology or common sense psychology. And we've touched on this before, right? Imagine, to use the example I used way back in the beginning of the course, when it was still nice outside and we could still lecture outside. Imagine that my roommate is leaving the apartment and I notice that they take their umbrella with them. Okay, so why would they have done that? It's sunny outside, but they're taking their umbrella. Well, maybe I attribute certain beliefs and desires to them. I say to myself, well, my roommate must have checked the weather and learned that it's possible that it will rain later. And further, my roommate desires to stay dry in case it rains. So that explains why they brought their umbrella. Um, Mm. so this is the kind of this is folk psychology, right? Um, to use an example that hits a little more close to home, last night I was up watching the television in the evening, and I heard a crash come from downstairs, and a whole bunch of people going, "Oh no!" And this morning, when I came downstairs, I saw that something had been broken uh, by my downstairs neighbors, who I guess were having a little bit of a get together. Um, so I can kind of connect the dots, like, oh, they got a bit rowdy and broke something and felt bad about it. I'm attributing mental states to them based upon behavior, by their observable behavior, right? So that's folk psychology, and we all do this all the time. What the eliminative materialists say is that our folk psychology is not a good scientific psychology. It's not a good theory of the mental. And as we improve our understanding of the mental, we'll actually be able to leave notions of beliefs, notions of desires, and other psychological terms behind. Um, and they point to occurrences like this that have happened in the sciences. So, one example is elan vital, or vital force. The vital force was once used to explain life. Why are some things alive and others are not alive? Well, things that are alive must have some kind of vital force or elan vital. Um, Now we no longer appeal to this idea because we understand things like, um, genetics, metabolism, reproduction, evolution, right? We have all of these um, ideas in biology that we've discovered that have replaced this idea of elan vital. So we no longer appeal to elan vital. Similarly, the luminiferous ether. You might have heard of this. It was thought that this ether was some sort of medium through which light or gravity propagated through space. But then along came Albert Einstein, who was responsible for replacing this notion with space-time. I mean, we had notions of space and time prior to Einstein, obviously, but it was Einstein who said, so, for example, gravity is a distortion in space-time, and that's what explains it. And it works better than the luminiferous ether. So we've sort of abandoned the idea of the luminiferous ether. There's some questions here. Yeah, well, I guess if you can remember that essay, but you could use this as a, that depending on the topic of your essay, that might be a punchy way to start your essay. A little anecdote, right? Um, that's a possibility. Phlogiston and caloric fluid used to be appealed to in order to explain how heat moves. You know, we've sort of abandoned it since the advent of thermodynamics, but we used to appeal to it. Um, what the eliminative materialists are saying is that one day terms like beliefs and desire will go the way of terms like elan vital or the luminiferous ether or phlogiston, and we won't explain the mental in terms of beliefs or desires. So we're um, so this is like more extreme than reductionist physicalism. This is eliminativist, an eliminativist sort of physicalism, in that we're eliminating terms and concepts that that are not useful, or at least might turn out not to be useful. And so the Churchlands, Paul and Patricia Churchland, are a couple of notable eliminative materialists. Another kind of physicalism, and this will be the last one we talk about before we get to our topic for today, is behaviorism. So I know we have a couple of psych students in the class, so you've no doubt heard of behaviorism by now. Behaviorism in psychology is the idea that all learning and all behavior is the product of conditioning, which is the formation of an association between stimulus and response. The behaviorists thought that we didn't need mental states to explain behavior, right? We don't need to talk about, beliefs in the case of the pigeon in the Skinner box, pushing a button to get a reward. We don't need to say that the pigeon believes that by pushing this button it will receive a reward. It's just a matter of stimulus and response and association and reinforcement. Um, and so in philosophy, there was a kind of parallel um, to this, reductive behaviorism or logical behaviorism. The causes of all behaviors are just environmental stimuli. And when we talk about mental states, we're actually talking about just these sort of descriptions of our behavioral dispositions. So we're reducing mental to the behavioral. But there's also eliminative behaviorism or ontological behaviorism, which it rejects the existence of the mental altogether. And this is what the famous behaviorist B.F. Skinner championed. Now, both the behaviorists and the eliminativists think that our mentalistic terminology doesn't do much explanatory work. Um, Otherwise, uh, there are some other similarities and some other dissimilarities, but I don't want to get too into the weeds on this. I will note that behaviorism has faced some significant challenges. It was largely replaced in psychology um, by cognitive psychology, which started to occur in the 1960s. Likewise, there was also work happening in linguistics that posed problems for the behaviorists, like the work of Noam Chomsky, for example. on the notion of universal grammar. Of course, some of the evidence against behaviorism actually came from behaviorist psychologists themselves. So psychologists in the room might like to look at the work of Edward Tolman in his rat studies, how he trained rats to run mazes, and he found out that while he initially thought that the rats who were receiving rewards were learning to run the maze faster, it turned out that the group of rats who were not receiving rewards were actually learning the maze at the same time. And once they started receiving rewards, they actually showed that they knew the layout of the maze better. So they must have been sort of keeping a sort of mental map of the maze, even though there was no association and reinforcement. Um, so that's a mental representation if there ever was one. So yeah, a lot of problems for behaviorism emerged from a variety of areas. And behaviorists also can't really get away from talk about the mental. Um, Behaviorism also has a really hard time explaining novel behavior. After all, I can be conditioned to behave a certain way, but if I do something new that I haven't been conditioned to do, how does behaviorism explain that? So that's it for the nature of mind. Now we're going to talk about a really fun topic, and that is personal identity. So Khalid asks, were some of the challenges of behaviorism as a result of the fact that linguistics, among other things, would make up the study of cognitive science? Yes, that's exactly right. This is what we mean when we refer to the cognitive revolution. Um, and there were all kinds of things that happen. Actually, Khalid, if you're taking a cognitive science class, you're probably learning about all of this. Um, so you had, well, first of all, problems with behaviorism that were identified by behaviorists themselves, like Edward Tolman. Uh, Chomsky's work in linguistics, which posited a universal grammar, a sort of innate grammar that enables children to learn language faster um, than you would expect if it were just a matter of stimulus, response, association, reinforcement, etc. There were developments in artificial intelligence. So, Alan Turing's work on Turing machines, and then Hilary Putnam's extension of that to machine functionalism. Cognitive psychology, um, especially the mental imagery debate, which is really cool. If you're taking again, if you're taking a cognitive science course, chances are you're going to hear about a lot of this. Um, so absolutely, and cognitive science kind of emerges out of all of these different disciplines um, studying the mind from their own unique perspectives. Yuvraj says, is my assumption that my mental state is stable enough to rationally write about self-identity and a false reality assumed from my unstable mind? Um, I don't know, maybe. I think it's pretty safe to say that yes, you're fine. Whatever the self is, it's stable enough to think about what selves are. Does that make sense? See, how are we doing for time? Okay, 12:02. Personal identity in the self. Let us start by reflecting on what makes a person, and more specifically, what makes a person a particular person. So, what makes you you and not someone else? A couple of the answers that you could give to a question like this are actually things that we've already touched upon in a lot of different parts of this class. One which immediately comes to mind is your soul. Maybe you're you and I'm me because your soul is your soul and my soul is my soul. On what I'll call soul theory, the soul is what is essentially you. Um, and this goes back to Plato, right? And of course, Plato casts a long shadow. Um, Plato influenced early Christian thinkers, like Saint Augustine. Um, so this soul theory that we get from Plato, we actually see a lot of in Christianity, less so the other Abrahamic religions, um, but it's there. And a lot of us think of the soul, if we have a soul in that sense, as this sort of thing that is essentially you, right? Think of Descartes, right? The soul or the mind. What Descartes really is his mind or soul, not his body. But then again, maybe you don't think of it that way. Maybe you think that your mind or some aspect thereof is what is really you. Or maybe your body is what is you. Or your DNA. Maybe there's something specific about your psychology that makes you you, like your memories or your particular trajectory of um, psychological development, we'll say, right? So there are a lot of things that we could appeal to answer this question. Which one is correct? Well, it probably depends on which theory of identity that you're going for, right? Let's ask another question. Are you the same person you were yesterday? Are you the same person that you were a year ago or a decade ago? It seems like you're still the same person, doesn't it? Like, I feel like I'm the same person I was yesterday. I feel like I was the same person, although maybe a bit different, uh, that I was 10 years ago. I've changed, right? But I'm still me. So what is it that makes me me? Have you ever thought about this? Let's do a thought experiment. This is the Ship of Theseus. Actually, this isn't really the Ship of Theseus, but this is a trireme, a ship that the ancient Greeks would have sailed. This one in particular is maintained by the Greek Navy. So, um, but it gives us an idea of what the Ship of Theseus must have been like. The Ship of Theseus. What is the Ship of Theseus? Well, Theseus was a legendary admiral, um, a sailor, and according to legend, he founded Athenian democracy. So we want to preserve his ship since he's so legendary. So we take his trireme and we preserve it as a museum ship. So we don't put it in a museum, but the ship itself is the museum. And you can go on the ship and check it out if you want, right? Have you heard of these machine museum ships before? They exist today, you know. I think you can go down to the United States and you can check out some museum ships, like old warships from the Second World War, and you can like walk around them and check them out. That's what we're doing with the Ship of Theseus. It's a museum ship. We want to preserve it so that everyone can come and see the ship. But after a while, certain parts of the ship start to wear out. Maybe certain planks need to be replaced. So we replace them. Maybe the sails get tattered and the ropes get worn out. So we replace those. And eventually, after many, many, many years, every part of the ship has been replaced. Now, here's the question. Is it still the same ship? This is where you come in. I want you all to tell me whether it's the same ship after all of the parts have been replaced. So Devlin says yes. Prenil says, no, it's a replica now. So does Isaac, Yuvraj. Natalie says it's the same because the structure and purposes remain the same. Caleb says yes. Uh, Basatu says, well, the changes were made gradually, right? So the identity carries on. Physically, no. Spiritually, yes. Well, it's the ship. That's what it's called, the Ship of Theseus. Um, if the ship had a conscious mind, then yes, but it doesn't, so no. Ah, that's interesting. Yeah. Um, well, the thing about that, Khalid, that's a good idea, except it's just a museum at this point. It doesn't do much. If it were still out there sailing and Theseus was still sailing it, and he had to gradually replace all of the planks over many, many years, then maybe a lot of people would agree it's still the same ship. Maybe because Theseus still owns it and sails it. Well, here, I'll save you the headache, Levon. Um, there's two camps, right? One is yes, it's the same ship. One is no, it's a different ship, right? Um, I mean, in a way, this is a lot like us, right? I'm not made of the same molecules I was 10 years ago, but I still feel like I'm the same person. Maybe the ship of Theseus is like that. It's not made out of all of the same parts as before, yet it remains the ship of Theseus. Although, if you believe that, if it still is the ship after all of the parts have been replaced, what happens if we take all of the old parts and put them back together? Now, which one is the ship of Theseus? This would be like a duplication problem, which we're going to encounter as we get further into this material. Ship one and ship two, maybe. Yeah. Um, for those of you who think that after all the parts have been replaced, it's a different ship, when did it become the different ship? Was it when the first plank was replaced? When half of the parts were replaced? When most of the parts were replaced? Or only when all of them were replaced? Hmm. That's right, Galen. Over 50%. Some say all, some say over 50%. Well, in this case, because it's a museum ship, Devlin, we mean, I think, this is the ship that Theseus sailed. But if all the parts are replaced, then, right, that's the question. Is it still the same ship? Um, we're not going to come up with any definitive answers here. This is just to show you the difficulties that we run into when thinking about questions concerning identity. In this case, identity of persons. Yeah. Yeah, Levon, maybe there's an important differences between humans and ships, right? Hmm. Yeah. Well, here it is a different purpose, right, Khalid? Because before Theseus has got to take it to Crete to save the youths from the Minotaur in the labyrinth, right? But what if he does something else with it? I think something this also highlights is the different ways that we can think about identity. And your answer to this thought experiment might depend on a sort of unconscious assumption about what type of identity is at issue. So we'll go over some different ways of understanding identity now. Yeah, it would still be under his command. Um, so there's various ways we can think of identity. One is qualitative identity, right, where two things might have the same qualities. So everybody here has a copy of the textbook. Um, Maybe some of you have digital copies and some of you have physical copies. Let's just say, those of you that have physical copies, um, all of those books have the same qualities. They're qualitatively identical, even though they're individual books. There's numerical identity, where X and Y are the very same entity. So think here of Batman and Bruce Wayne. Um, they're numerically identical in that Batman just is Bruce Wayne, right? There's also individual identity. That's what constitutes the nature of the individual. So Theseus, what makes him Theseus? Well, he was a legendary sailor, rescued the 14 youths from the Minotaur, founded Athenian democracy. Those are the things that make Theseus Theseus. Um, and then there's personhood identity. What makes an entity a person? Here you might be thinking of, sort of sci-fi examples, right? I always think of Mr. Data from Star Trek: The Next Generation, the android who wishes to be human. Um, and he doesn't quite become human, but arguably he is a person. And they actually have there's a whole episode dedicated to this, which I guess every philosophy professor recommends to their students at some point or another. The episode is entitled "The Measure of a Man," and what happens is a scientist wants to come and take Data apart to study him. Captain Picard and the rest of the crew of the Enterprise say, "Well, you can't do that. Data's a person." And the scientist argues that Data is in fact property, not a person, and they have to have a sort of philosophical hearing to determine whether Data is a person and whether he has the right to decline being disassembled. So whatever it is that makes Data a person, we're talking personhood identity there. Yeah, it's a great episode. It's an early episode, right? It's season two. I'm a huge Star Trek nerd, and I tend to be of the opinion that the next generation, the successor series to the original series with Kirk and Spock and McCoy and all those guys, it started getting good in season three. Um, but this episode is really good. You've got to watch it. Very good episode. Um, so there's various ways that uh there's ways that these ways of understanding identity can interact with one another. There might be something that makes me the person who I am, and that makes me a person, but that also individuates me from other people. Um, I might have certain qualities as other people, but not enough to, I guess, how do I put this? I still have sufficient qualities that are distinct from others to individuate me from other people. Even if there were a copy of me and we were qualitatively identical, We have the same physical characteristics, for example. Maybe my duplicate go on to have very different life experiences, um, and so that individuates us from one another. I remain a professor, but my copy decides to, um, I don't know, pursue the dream of becoming a novelist, right? And that would individuate us, even though we have qualities in common. People are still talking about the ship. So let's talk about persons and identity. So one way to understand a person, or to even just to characterize persons, is that persons have mental lives. Um, Persons are conscious. They have memories. They have concerns, emotions, beliefs, and desires. Persons also have bodies, right? So I, as a person, have a certain set of concerns. Um, you know, being a good professor, um, being healthy is a concern, I guess. Remaining financially stable, right? These are the sorts of concerns that persons can have. The security of my person is a concern, obviously. Um, um, but you can also characterize persons by their bodies, of course. You can say, "Oh, look at that person. That's Professor Redstone. That other person, clearly that's not Professor Redstone." Um, right? Well, individual identity is what individuates you, what makes you you and not some other person in this case. But personhood identity is just what makes a person a person. So you can think of personhood identity individuates persons from non-persons, and then individual identity, which I guess we could also call personal identity, is what makes you you and not someone else. So we can identify you as an individual person as opposed to like an automaton, right? Okay, so now we know you're a person, but there's a lot of persons. So what makes Sohaila Sohaila and what makes Josh Josh? Those are the individual characteristics that individuate us. See what I mean? Yeah, the terminology is a bit misleading here, but um, that's what I'm here for. So yeah, we can characterize persons as those sorts of creatures which have mental lives, but we can characterize them by their bodies. I might look over there and see my friend John. How do I know it's him? Well, I recognize his body, the way he looks, his face, right? These are a couple of intuitive views, but there are more views than this. For instance, there are hylomorphic views. These are like form and matter views. These go back to Aristotle. So remember, hylomorphism comes from hule, which means matter, and morphe, which means form. So you need the matter and some organizing principle to inform the matter. Um, we're not going to look at this in too much detail today, but just remember the bucket of goo, right? I could be if you took all of the materials that I'm made of, carbon, water, calcium, iron, etc., mixed them into a bucket, you just have a bucket of goo. Um, the organizing principle has to inform the matter, has to organize it in the right way to make it a human person. Otherwise, it's just goo. So another question in the chat. Oh no, I think it's just more talk about the ship. So don't get too bogged down on the ship, guys. What's not important is the ship. What's important is us. Um, let's talk about a psychological view of identity. Um, so this type of view, this type of psychological view is due to John Locke, who we've encountered before. Remember, John Locke was our representative realist, talked about ideas of primary and secondary qualities. So you remember John Locke. Now, Locke argued that your personal identity is constituted by a sort of chain, if you like, of remembered experiences. Locke himself uses the word consciousness, but what he seems to mean is memory. So we call this the memory criterion of personal identity. And one thing to note is that Locke seems to be concerned with numerical identity. He's interested in what makes a person the person that they are throughout time, even though there are various changes that happen to them. So, like the Ship of Theseus, parts get replaced. You're like that in the sense that your body grows and ages. Nowadays, we understand that the cells of the body renew themselves periodically. It doesn't happen. It's not like every organ renews itself every 7 years. But by the end of 7 years, it is like a whole new you. Although different organs renew themselves at different rates. So you have a new stomach lining, I think, like I don't know, every day or every week, right? Um, uh, Other organs, it's different. But the point is, there are changes that happen to you. You grow up, you age, the organs of the body change, the cells get replaced, the molecules that make up those cells change. But there's something that makes you the same person throughout all of that. And for Locke, it's this chain of remembered experiences that makes you the same person throughout time, in spite of these changes. So that's what Locke is interested in. Um, so Yeah, what is it that makes you you throughout time? And what is it that makes you you and not someone else at a particular moment in time? We're going to follow Crumley and call the first kind of question the persistence question. So, what makes you the same person over time, in spite of the changes that you undergo? That's the persistence question. What makes you you and not someone else? That's the individuation question. So let's keep that in mind. Yes, in fact, that's I think a similar point is raised in the textbook, Khalid, like dementia patients, for example. At the end stages of dementia, say you've lost like all of your autobiographical memories, there is a sense in which that person is not the same person as they were before the disease affected them, I should say. Um, and again, still more in the chat. He might. Yeah. Um, there's actually an example. It's got to do with it's like the prince and the pauper sort of example. What if they switched minds, right? So that this poor beggar became a prince and the prince the beggar. Um, uh, it's the chain of remembered experiences that is key. So even though this poor guy now has the body of a prince, he's still the same person he was before, and vice versa. Or, um, to use a more Contemporary example, maybe you swap bodies with somebody, as in the movie Freaky Friday, or the sequel. I believe it is called Freakier Friday, although I have not seen it. Um, but I assume it's very much like the first one. People switch bodies. But let's go with the first one, right? Lindsay Lohan's character switches bodies with Jamie Lee Curtis's character. Um, and they're in the wrong body. But what makes them who they are? Well, in this case, it's got to be some psychological criterion, right? Because they've switched. Um, and here I have the same memories. Let's say I'm Lindsay Lohan's character and I get put into Jamie Lee Curtis's character's body. I still have all the memories that I had when I was embodied as Lindsay Lohan, or her character in the film. I don't know their names, um, but you get the idea. Um, if that character still has all of her memories as the daughter, even when she's in the mother's body, um, that she's still that person, even though the body is changed, right? And again, the Alzheimer's example is another one. Um, if I were to lose all of my memories, not even via Alzheimer's, but perhaps some kind of acquired brain injury, then there's a strong sense on this theory that I might not be the same person anymore. Um, yeah, so the persistence question is um is the question about what is it that makes you the same person over time, in spite of all the changes that happen to you. So like you're the same person that you were when you were 5 years old. You're still Levon, but you've changed, right? You've grown up. You've become taller, I imagine. Um, you've your mind has developed. When you were 5 years old, you were in elementary school. Now you're in university. Um, so you're the same person that you were, or we want to say that you're the same person that you were in spite of these changes that have occurred. And the persistence question is the question of what is it that makes you the same person that you were when you were 5 years old as you are now? And the answer, according to Locke, is a chain of remembered experiences. Now, the individuation question is all about what individuates you from other people. What makes you Levon and not someone else? And again, it's your chain of remembered experiences. Does that answer your question? No prob. Ah, wow, people are still talking about the ship, huh? Guys, don't lose sight of the actual thing, which is personal identity, not the ship's identity. It's a fun thought experiment. It's easy to get sucked into it, though. Um, this I might suggest that this might be a Discord conversation. Otherwise, you might miss something. Um, let's see. How are we doing for time? I think we're still doing all right for time. What if I shared the same memories of another individual? What if you changed my memories so that I have all of the memories as, I don't know, Achilles? So I have Achilles memories now. I have all of the memories of going to Troy or Ilium to fight the Trojans with all the rest of the Achaeans. I have the memory of fighting Hector in single combat. I have the memory of being struck in my heel by an arrow fired by Paris. If I had all of Achilles' memories, then on this theory, I would just be the same person as Achilles. Yeah. Well, if I were Achilles, I would have been a baby when my mom dipped me in the river Styx, right? So I don't know if I'd remember that. But sure, say I did. She dips me in the river and forgets to dip the ankle, which is why Paris is able to get me with that arrow, right? If I had all of those memories, I would just be Achilles. Or maybe like a version of Achilles. I mean, earlier we talked about the body swap example, but there are other examples in science fiction where you have, the idea of uploading your consciousness to a computer or transferring your mind to another body. And that's like this. Well, I'm going to say something that's going to sound a little strange, and maybe even a little horrifying. But babies aren't okay. I'm not going to say babies aren't people, but babies are not yet fully developed persons. They will be one day, um, but they're not full-blown persons just yet, right? Of course, babies are people in the sense that they're human beings, but a baby is not a person, at least not a very sophisticated one. So I guess you could say it's not that you're different people when you're a baby. It's that you're not yet a full-blown person yet in the philosophical sense. So even if you don't remember things, um, it again, it's not a question of whether you're the same person or a different person. You haven't yet become the person that you are. Does that make sense to you, Yusuf? Yeah, not yet. I mean, you're like the beginnings of a person, but you're not a full-blown philosophical person yet. That's my opinion, though. Disagree with me if you like. Um, okay, now we're still on the ship. Someone asked, "Oh yeah, the Achilles tendon." Yeah, that's exactly right. The Achilles tendon comes from Achilles' heel, which again is where Paris shot him in the Iliad. Well, Tara, there might be problems with this view. Um, and I'll get that. I'll get there. Um, I don't know if it's cumulative. If it is cumulative, then that's a problem, though. Um, you can think of there's an example of the boy who was a thief who grew into the brave general, right, in the textbook. So the chat's getting a little crazy with the Ship of Theseus stuff. I'm having trouble finding the actual questions related to what I'm talking about versus the Ship of Theseus stuff. So maybe we should bracket the Ship of Theseus discussion and carry on in the Discord server. Um, so Locke explains, and I apologize for the typo here. For it being the same consciousness that makes a man be himself to himself, personal identity depends on that only, whether it be annexed only to one individual substance or can be continued in a succession of several substances. Now that's really interesting. What he seems to mean is that yeah, if my memories, say, I don't know if this is a view Locke held, but this is actually one of the things that inspired a lot of this discussion is what happens when people go to heaven, right? If you believe that people go to heaven, Christian theologians were like, okay, so what happens here? So you die, basically, right? Your body dies, and then what happens to the soul? Um, well, eventually we're all resurrected and we go to heaven or something. Um, so is your resurrected body in heaven, either immediately in heaven or after the day of judgment, whatever, depends on the flavor of Christianity you're talking about, I think. Um, so what's that resurrected person? Is that still you? And before you're resurrected, are you you when you're just a disembodied soul? I think Locke would say the resurrected individual, so long as he or she had the memories, um, that would still be the same individual, right? That's what he means here in a succession of several substances. He continues, for it is by the consciousness it has been of it's by the consciousness of its present thoughts and actions that it is a self to itself now, and will be the same self as far as the same consciousness can extend to actions past or to come. So according to Locke, it doesn't matter having the same body. It's not a matter of an immaterial soul. It's the memories that you have when you are conscious. Now, here's an interesting question. What happens when you lose consciousness? In the words of philosopher Billie Eilish, when we fall asleep, where do we go? It would seem that you kind of pop out of existence, right? Um, you fall asleep, and temporarily it's as if you cease to exist. But when you get up the next day, you still remember who you were. So you're still you. And that's kind of interesting, isn't it? What do you think? I mean, you don't pop out of existence in the sense that your body ceases to exist, but the experiencing individual ceases to exist when you go to sleep every night. Yeah, sorry, it's a bit of a dad joke at this point. I saved this one. I've used it a couple years in a row. So Khalid, Billie Eilish is not actually a philosopher. She is a recording artist, but she has that song, right? Um, and it reminds me of this question, and that is if I go to sleep, right, and I lose consciousness, or say I go under general anesthesia, there's no me when I'm out, right? But I get up again and I still feel like the same person I was before the continuity of consciousness was interrupted. And that's because Locke would say, I have this chain of remembered experiences. Well, dreams, I would say those are simply dreams, right? Um, but you could still think of those as experiences that individuate you. For example, if I fall asleep, I'm not conscious during during non-REM sleep, but I might have a dream that I then remember. Um, and it still seems like there's somebody having the dream, right? So I guess what I'm saying is I'll be a little bit more precise is what I should say is that it's the non-REM sleep is when you disappear. Yeah. Or well, not just lucid dreams, Khalid, although I see what you're saying, but the typical dreams, there's still somebody who's having them, right? So that's what I would say, Maddie, to answer your question. Um, well, it doesn't even mean you're a different person, Sohaila. It means that you are not a you while you sleep, right? There's nobody experiencing anything when you're in non-REM sleep. So if you're not having any dreams, and you're unconscious, there's no you anymore. It kind of temporarily ceases to exist. Hannah says, "Are you still the same continuous person as long as there's the prospect you would wake up again and regain consciousness? Is someone in a coma no longer a person, or if we're unsure?" Yeah, yeah, that's a really good question. So if there is nothing that it's like to be in a coma, then while that person is in a coma, it's like there's no individual there. But if there is something that it's like to be in a coma, then it's a very different case, right? Um, and again, I'm not sure. I'm not sure when it comes to comas. Hmm. Yeah, Galen. Well, that reminds me of those videos that you see of people coming out of anesthesia and they're still quite groggy. And then people play those cruel jokes on them, like, oh, it's the zombie apocalypse, right? And of course, they're still quite loopy from the anesthetic, so they believe it. They haven't quite got themselves together just yet. Um, that's a good point. Yeah. Yeah, okay, interesting. I had some wisdom teeth out, but I didn't go under anesthesia. I've never been under anesthesia. Um, but I would welcome it as an interesting experience for philosophy's sake. Yeah. Yeah, Levon, like if you have a nap, it's like you pop out of existence for a bit. Okay, so Finn says, does not having an individual there mean that they are nothing? They're still thoughts and memories while they're sleeping. Um, I mean, I guess they're still there in a sense, but my point is that when you're not conscious, there's nobody there, right? Khalid says, there's been evidence of brain activity post-mortem. Would there be something similar to a dream state? Maybe. Again, I don't know. I'm not that kind of doctor. Um, but perhaps brain activity continues for a little bit after breathing, and your heart gives out, but not for long because the brain needs a lot of oxygen, and if the heart and lungs aren't working to supply it, brain death occurs quite quickly. Um, okay, we've got about 10 minutes left, so I don't think we're going to make it quite to the end here, but that's okay. So that's interesting. A couple of you were asking, what if you forget something? If you forget something, say something that's an important aspect of your identity, you continue to exist um, uh, as the same person. This is a criticism that is made against Locke, right? You have, uh, I think, the boy who, he stole something. Um, but then he becomes a soldier, and then the soldier becomes the brave general, and the boy is identical with the soldier who remembers having committed the crime. The soldier is identical with the general, having remembered, the general remembers being the soldier, but the general does not remember having stolen the thing when he was a boy. So clearly they're all identical. Yet the general cannot be the boy because he doesn't remember what he did when he was the boy, right? That's a criticism. So maybe we can reply to this sort of worry by saying that what we really need is a sort of continuity in the sense of a chain of memories, right? You don't have to remember every single thing, but there needs to be a sort of chain of remembered experiences. So that even if you forget something, you could still kind of trace the connection between all of your memories. I mean, this seems satisfactory to me. And it seems like when I think about it, it's kind of like this is how I operate. Um, Kind of, Yusuf. Yeah. Also, like Locke doesn't talk about this, but I've mentioned before how memories actually become semanticized over time. So I know that when I was really young, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5, I went to the zoo. But I don't really remember much of it. I just remember that I was there, and I remember that I saw the elephants. But I don't really remember what the elephants were like. You know what I mean? So there's that. Do you know, and I'm going to end on this note, a really, really good film, if you want to talk about personal identity, um, either for your essay or for anything else, for just to think about it more. It's a really good film called Memento. It was one of Christopher Nolan's early films. Have any of you seen it? Pernille, you've seen it. Yeah. Okay. So Pernille, you probably know what I'm talking about. Finn, you absolutely should watch it. McKenna's seen it. So I'm gonna say just the B99. Oh, Brooklyn 99. Is that Brooklyn 99? Is that what that means? I haven't seen that episode. Um, I'm going to assign you all some homework for the weekend, and it will be to watch Memento. Um, because it really, I think, meshes well with some of the things that we're talking about here. I don't think I want to try and tackle the fission objection because this is the sort of thing that uh, gets us into a discussion, and I do have another class to get to. So I guess I'll close by saying, well, by asking you if there are any questions about anything we've covered today. Okay, doesn't seem to be any questions. It is. It is. This is one of my favorite topics. Definitely one of my favorite topics. So check out Memento. Heck, check out the episode of Star Trek I mentioned. Um, Actually, there's a lot of personal identity stuff in the Star Trek universe. I talk about this in part two, but there's all kinds of, we're about to talk about fission problems and duplication problems. There are a number of those. People get transporter duplicated all the time. Yeah, it is. It is. It is, Eliane. Yeah, like, well, there's an episode of the original series, right, where Kirk is duplicated and one's like a good Captain Kirk and one's evil. Um, I think it's called The Enemy Within. The episode Second Chances, Next Generation. Commander Riker finds out he has a transporter duplicate, and they hate each other, which I think is hilarious. Um, and then Voyager. There's the Voyager episode Tuvix, right, where Tuvok and Neelix get merged, and then what do we do with Tuvix? Um, yeah, yeah, I was disappointed with. I mean, I was not at the time, but on a rewatch, it's like we're home. Okay, end of show. I want to see. I want to see like, okay, you've been away in space for so many years. Now you're back. I want to see what that's like. You know what I mean? Anyway, if you're looking for that's fair. I don't know. It's yeah, time travel shenanigans. Um, that's fair. Well, we better wrap it up. But yeah, check out some of those episodes if you want. Check out Memento. Think about what makes you you over the weekend. Okay? And I'll see you all on Tuesday. And we're falling a little bit behind, which I don't know. I think I've saved us enough wiggle room. We should be okay, but it looks like we'll probably finish this off on Tuesday and then get started on the second part. And anyway, we're a little behind, but I'm not worried about it. So have a good weekend, everyone. and I'll see you on Tuesday. Bye for now.